Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Obviously, thank you, Derrick, for joining us today. I've known you for a few years now, and I think something that's like always struck me is just like how much you can make a connection with guests, with other wine people, and just make things kind of accessible and fun. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring you in and have a fun conversation today. Just a little background for everyone. I think all of you are part of Second City Psalms, but just in case, Second City Psalms is an educational group. This year we are um, trying to include a little bit more education, just beyond kind of studying wine regions, just thinking about, how we move forward during COVID and everything else. So thank you, Derrick. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of background about who you are, where you grew up, what you've been up to for the past few years.
Yeah, so Derrick Westbrook. I am one of the partners at 1340 Beer, Wine, and Spirits in the West Loop, formerly known as Madison Vine Wines. So many of you may know it as that. Um, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, born and raised. Southern gentleman, as they say. And yeah, that's kind of had a really big impact and influence on everything in my approach to wine and food and all things, hospitality and culinary. I think the South is a home of hospitality. So, they even have a phrase named after it. So, I'm a little biased in that way. But uh, only child. So I am, selfish, and I have learned, I've gotten really good at having my own personal imagination. So that's probably
Awesome.
in a nutshell.
Yeah, no. I have sort of a bunch of questions here. If anyone else has questions, feel free to kind of jump in. But I wanted just this to be a fun conversation with Derrick. Just hear a little bit more about his story, and I hope that it's kind of helpful for all of you when you're thinking about where do we go from here. Are restaurants a thing that's even viable for us as sommeliers these days, and what are some other options? And I think Derrick's done a great job of just kind of exploring, restaurants and retail and events and everything else. So we'll kind of get into that. But my first question is just, what was the first wine you ever loved?
Yeah. So I can tell you the first wine like I remember that got me hooked was, and it's not really a wine. I remember like the most vivid wine memory, first vivid wine memory was probably like drinking Arbor Mist in college. That was probably like my first wine memory. The first wine that I probably was like, oh, this is different. Was Sommeliers has their Grand Cru Riesling out of Alsace, France. That was the first time I was like, oh, this is different.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the first, I think, like memories of. I would say that one. There's a couple. I would say those two. Like Arbor Mist in college was probably my like, oh, I like wine in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think dry Riesling too is a lot of people's like gateway gateway wine.
This is serious. This is
Yeah.
serious.
And so then how did you get into wine?
Yeah, it was 100% a fluke. So I was in university at UAB, Birmingham, Alabama, and I was you know I was studying while there in education policy change, and then I started working at a small Italian restaurant, and of course wine list is super important. They were rebuilding their wine list then, and so I had the opportunity because I had gotten favor with the manager. I got to taste with them, and so try stuff that they were coming in that they were bringing in. And I wasn't really picking or choosing anything, but it was just like an opportunity to taste. And at that moment, like that's probably when I was like, oh, this is cool because I saw like the kind of the thought process behind picking wine and being able to taste things right next to each other. Like that being my first introduction to like wine drinking seriously was very pivotal for me, and just being able to sit there and take it from a space of analyzing wine which is something I enjoy doing, like breaking things down. Being a sociology major, doing education policy change, even as a kid, like it was always, what is it, why, the why question. So it answered that question, and that's basically my very beginning. There's a long story that leads up to me being in Chicago, but that's the hard and fast for you.
Nice. That's the next conversation with Derrick. Nice. So what was your experience like working at Next specifically?
So Next was fantastic. I think like for me, it was my first, Michelin star restaurant. They're now Michelin, but that first kind of, high end. I always when I tell customers, I was like, oh, they put food on plates with tweezers. Like that's the type of restaurant it is. And so that was
Microgreens everywhere.
yeah, there you go. Right? And so when thinking about Next, like it was the first time like I got to experience like what it was to be in such a fast-paced environment and to think about how much I could push myself in that environment. Like it was the first time where it was, can you do this as quickly as possible, but with as much intention as possible? And Next is the place where I realized that these guys weren't like they're great and the things they do are amazing. And for a long time, I had like Michelin star fine dining at a certain level, and I realized at that moment it was like, oh, like they're not doing anything that is so spectacular, so different, or their brains aren't that much greater than mine. That they're not thinking of these new concepts, or there's nothing out there that surpasses my own knowledge and my abilities. And so that was the point in time where I was like, oh, this isn't like I thought that this was an unreachable goal and that I couldn't maintain or live in this space. And at that point in time, I was like, oh, I could do this. Like I could figure it out. Like it's not as hard as I thought it was. And so that was probably like my experience. I will say that, I also learned how to, cut corners, like how to improvise and cut corners in a space where, there are no corners to be cut because you can't do everything perfect. And just being okay with like, look, everything's not going to be perfect. As long as you can get to the point and do the thing and the table doesn't see the problem or the table doesn't feel it, then you're okay. And if you can justify that and you can justify your process, that and that structure, I early on or actually later in life realize that I need a lot of structure. The more structure for me, the better. And then if you give me that structure, I can improvise within it. So it having a ton of structure was really great for me, and I really appreciated that. But I that's when the genuflecting about Michelin stars and genuflecting about you know restaurant ratings, like it all probably ceased when I got to Next. Like it was nice to tell people, but it was shoulder shrug in a lot of ways because it wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever have to do in my life. So
Yeah, it's kind of, when you get behind the curtain, you realize like, oh, that's how all of that happens, and
yeah,
that's how it comes to be. Yeah. Um, and then you moved on to Elizabeth next.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth was fantastic. I mean, I owe probably the biggest chunk of my career I owe to Elizabeth from just a career standpoint. I mean, that's the place where, you know, I found my voice. That's the place where you know, a chef took a chance on me, Chef Reagan. Like that was a place where I learned how to buy too, like seriously. Like at Next, I tasted, I organized a cellar, but I was not buying. I was not making a purchase, and I was barely giving input. But Elizabeth, she basically gave me the keys to the beverage program, and which is basically the keys to her business, right? So
Mhm.
that was heavy. I felt that weight, I will admit, but buying there was really revelatory to me because I'd gone from a place where at Next you can get anybody to come see you, and you got the budget, right? Where at Elizabeth, that's a little bit further of a trek.
Yep.
And the budget isn't the same. We had a really small, like, 22 seats. So the budget wasn't the same. And I had to make sure that that budget could fit, everything else, including food costs, like thinking about that from a high level. So I know I couldn't outballer everyone else. So that's where I learned like, oh, off, Central Eastern Europe, lesser known. I started not caring about producers as much because I couldn't get the cool producers. Like the producers I learned and fell in love with were producers that people wouldn't notice or care about in the same sense. And so like finding value and finding really great wines in bad years, like that stuff where the price point was good for us, but the quality that the end consumer would get, and therefore I could tell a story. And because of Chef Reagan's menu, you had to be able to tell that story. And so thinking about like, how do these wines fit into the narrative of the story that we're telling? Just from either a label name or from a region, but also how they fit in the pairings. And so being able to do all those things at once with a small budget is probably like, you know, that was for me, that's when I got good. And that's when I started really not care about everybody else because we were so far away. I always think of us as like we were the outsiders, right? We were the outcasts, like it was the kitchen is super quick kitchen. It's ran by a one-man chef. It's owned by a one-man chef. So being being other in that sense, like that actually became a safe space for me to kind of grow, learn, gain my voice, and realize like, oh, I'm dope because of me, not because of the institution. um and there wasn't as much noise, right? Like you didn't hear as much people and many people talking about like write-ups or we got those things, but it wasn't to the point where I was always looking to see what someone was saying about it. So I could make my mistakes, I could learn, I could try new things without the worry of that spotlight. And not having that light actually gave me an opportunity to develop my voice. And I think like a lot of Psalms now, especially once you start to get those really great jobs, it's tough because now you have the pressure of the outside world trying to critique what you want to do. And I think of like when I think of like an artist when they make a record, right? You want to make a record not with everyone listening to what you're doing. Like you want to get the right people around you, make a great record, and then give it to the world and not have to worry about the noise and let the world determine after they get it how they feel about it and not really concern yourself during the process. And I think being at Elizabeth did that for me. And so, I owe everything to that time there. It really grew me significantly.
Yeah. What was like a favorite pairing of yours or pairings?
Um, that was a while ago. What was a favorite pairing? There was a course. There was a frappato. Oh, I remember. There was a course where we did there's a frappato. Who had it? Robert Hood had it. It was a pink label. I forgot who the producer was. It was a frappato, and we paired it with, I think it was a pork course. Um, and the course looked really light, and a lot of people were nervous about seeing the course, uh, like the wine in the course. And I was like, no, this is perfect because like the lightness of that frappato with the pork course, like it was just one of these things where you don't expect it to work. But it was just when I tasted the course by itself and when I tasted frappato by itself, it was like, this makes sense. Visually, it doesn't make sense, but you know, in my palate, like thinking about like taking the notes from what I remember from that pork course, what I remember from that frappato, that was probably one of my favorite pairings. And that's probably where I was like, oh, I could do this. Like I
Mhm.
figured this out. And it was probably like the second menu in where I felt comfortable. So where
Yeah. Sometimes you just gotta fake it until you make it kind of thing with
yeah.
those pairings where you're like, I don't know, does this
Yeah.
work?
It was definitely that second menu. I was like, oh, okay, I got it. I think I got it. So yeah, I remember that it
Cool.
was the pork and frappato course. I can even remember there was something wrapped around this pork and there was some leaf around it. It was absolutely beautiful. So yeah.
Nice. So just in general, what did you love about working in restaurants?
I mean, I love the pace. I mean, I love the cash at the end of the night, and sometimes, like, especially when we were getting like cash and checks, like the cash tips of the night, you keep those and you get a check. Like that was nice because I could just try to live off the cash and put the checks aside. That was fun. I think when you have a good night and everything's just flowing, like there's nothing like that high I really love. There's like nothing compared to that high of just you're hitting all the tables, you know, you throw a pairing out there or you make a suggestion or you're selling that thing that you really want to sell that you want to get off, or like you kind of anticipate that rapport too with tables. Like there's absolutely nothing compared to that. Um, I really love that. And I love like the kind of like making things work, like, you know, rolling the dice and being like, I think we can go back to back on these courses and we can push it. Like that's always fun, is when something just happens, the symmetry is just there. That's always a lot of fun. And it feels different at, you know, like in a steakhouse versus like being in Next versus being in Elizabeth. Like, but it feels different, but the feeling is the same, but they all show up differently. And so I
Mhm.
think like that's what I do miss the most, are those nights. And you know, going out hanging out after that wasn't too bad either. So
Yeah. What did you not like about working in restaurants?
so it's funny, like the thing I didn't like about restaurants is what I don't like kind of about like where we are as a society right now. Like I think those are the things that annoy me the most. I think, you know, the lack of autonomy as a server that you get a lot of times, you know, there's I think like this pseudo team mentality, like people have your back, but they don't. Like what you can do for me. And then like the health insurance, like that, like not having somewhat of a safety net was like, you know, it's cool when you're a kid, but as you get older, you're like, oh, I want these things as well. Um, and the funny thing is, like, I didn't mind like the conflict in managing like the kitchen versus food runners versus tables, and my counterparts. Like I thought that lesson was invaluable. I really appreciate that. It made me really good at what I do now. But I don't like the gluttony, the waste, the hierarchy. You know, like there's, you know, the underlying prejudice and stereotyping like of cultures, of people, of what you can do. And I don't really like talking to like, you know, expense accounts. Like that annoys me. Like I don't miss talking to expense account tables. Like I, you know, I didn't like, because it made me, for me personally, talking to those expense account tables made me want to like make them overspend. It's like, oh, okay, you're a jerk, so I'm gonna penalize you for that. And like I like it was I like I didn't like the like kind of vengeance I had against that, against like ignorant money.
Mhm.
Um, so I think those are probably the pieces of the business that I was not a fan of at all.
Yeah. So then moving from restaurants to retail, like what were some of your biggest surprises?
Uh, the sleep schedule that was a big difference. Like, you know, like having moving to a more of a daytime schedule. I also
Not
realized,
going to bed at 5 a.m. Yeah.
right? Like, that was tough. And then I think the one of the biggest surprises is realizing where people are. Like in a retail space, you get everyone. So like in a restaurant space, especially once I got to certain levels, like you're only getting a certain class, if you will, or a certain group of people. Whereas in retail, you're getting people from every perspective, and then realizing like where the public actually are when they're buying. Like where is the public when they're buying? Like, everything from, you know, entry level wines to, you know, to really cool obscure stuff to, you know, the different formats, and understanding how marketing and how what we see on TV is facilitating and pushing people towards purchases. Like an example of like, you know, like seltzers, like everyone knows, you know, Truly and White Claw. And it's funny, like you ask people to, you know, they come in wanting one thing and it's like, well, I'm giving you this other thing that's actually better. That having that audience is a little more difficult sometimes with trying to articulate and get those things across to your audience. Whereas in a restaurant, there are more constraints because you have a smaller menu, right? And
Mhm.
but when you're in a retail space, like whatever they want, you should have. And because of the way, you know, we set up our wine shop, is we're not trying to sell everything. Like, you know, we could, if we want to be Jewel, if we want to be Benny's, you know, that's a different model than what we can do, and quite frankly than what we want to do. So I think that was the biggest surprise. Is every day I get instant feedback on where the populace, where they are in terms of drinking, knowledge, and curiosity.
Yeah. So like what is a typical day kind of like for you? Oh,
Yeah,
working
so
retail.
like it depends. So like today's an off day, which is doesn't really exist in my life. So like it's an off day, but like, I'm doing today is the work I do is only stuff I want to do or super interested in. But so like say we started Tuesday is my beginning of my week. Usually I get there, an hour to 2 hours early. I'll do stocking and paperwork, admin work. It's funny, like after we open at 12 o'clock, like it's the least productive time. When we're open, it's probably the least productive I am. So I really enjoy that kind of early morning. So, get there 10 or 11 o'clock. We'll stock, play loud music, stock, and then do admin work. And then at 12 o'clock, I'll start to kind of peter down the admin work and do more in the store stuff. Uh, and on Tuesdays usually I have tastings, so I'll taste from starting at 12:30 to I'll go to 3. Sometimes we go to 3:30 if I really like the distributor. And we try to schedule things. I've been bad about it, but trying to schedule 30-minute segments for everyone. But Tuesday's usually a wash for getting anything done outside from after 12. Between that kind of 12 and 4, I'm tasting, doing what little I can, maybe restocking, so on and so forth, a little bit of planning. And then at 4 o'clock, it's just, sell, sell, sell. And then we close at 9. So at 8:30, 8:30ish, I try to like restock a little bit. And then 9, I'm really bad about, getting out at 9:30. So I'm usually from 9 to 9:30, I'm there stocking or just like taking my time. Sometimes I just want to sit down and so I just relax and do nothing. I'll have a glass of wine or a
Mhm.
cocktail by myself and be like, look, the day's over. I'm
Yep.
feeling good. Uh, and so that's kind of my Tuesdays. Wednesdays are the same. Thursdays are a little bit more admin heavy. And as I go through the week, it's less admin work and then more selling. I think for me personally, the most difficult days are Thursday and Fridays is because you're trying to wrap up all of your emails because no one's going to email you Saturday. So you want to get everything wrapped up. And because I don't come back on Monday, for people, if I don't respond on a Thursday, that means they're going to have, or Friday, that means that's a bigger gap, which is tough for them. You know, it depends on who's emailing or what it is. And,
Sure.
sometimes I don't care. It's like, look, you can wait. Uh, but in other cases, I know there's things that are time sensitive. So Thursday and Fridays are kind of my tight days because I need to get, we get deliveries on Wednesdays. So I need to have all my invoices. I like to have all invoices, all emails, everything wrapped up Thursday, Friday. So then on Saturday when I'm there, which is my last day during the week, I can just like sell and not think about anything and just be in the space, and just be present in the space. So that's kind of what a day and a week looks like for me.
Cool.
And,
Mhm.
and then I will say this: the only difference is, you know, that gets a wrench thrown into it because there's a lot of days where I'm doing tons of like shooting video. So that's a typical week, and it really never ever goes that way. So.
Cool. And then just between buying for restaurants and buying for retail, like is there sort of a difference for you? Like what kind of wines would you buy for retail that you wouldn't buy for a restaurant?
Yeah, so retail, I have a little more space to spread myself out, right, and to try things. And retail, I'm buying more things that are in categories that I don't necessarily love, but I know like make money. Um, and it's a bit more fun because I have more expansive view to buy more stuff. So I think that's the biggest is feeling more expansive. I feel more creative in buying when I'm buying in retail. Um, I can, I've gotten really good at like closeouts a lot more being in retail. Like I'm buying from a business standpoint a bit more
Hmm.
and thinking about like, COGS a lot more from a retail standpoint because the margins are so much thinner. It's like I have to be better at that. And then, pars and things of that nature and deals like case deals, having back stock and thinking about when that goes and planning and my planning too for buying, like for instance, I'll let you guys in on like kind of like now I'm buying really, really big. Like I'm blowing the budget this month because I don't want to buy anything in December, right? Like if I'm going to spend maybe a couple $100 in December, just because I know January is dead. And
Yep.
so like that meant that's in the back of my head while trying to think about, well, December's huge. So how do we overbuy without straining ourselves too much? So those are kind of the things that we think about. I'm buying with cash flow in mind. Whereas in restaurants, I never really thought about cash flow in the same way. Um, Even though like with a beverage program, you should think about it. It's just the margin is so much thinner that there's less room for error for me. And so that was a quick adaptation for me.
Yeah. So then what's the biggest difference for you between working at like 57th Street Wines or like, other places where you weren't an owner and now being co-owner?
Yeah, I think it's autonomy. I think, making decisions that affect like I feel better living and dying with decisions I make and trusting my instincts. And so being, realizing that this is I eat what I kill, right? Like that feels I can live and die with that, right? I mean that's just I have an entrepreneurial spirit and mentality, and that's something I've just realized. I also think like me being able to like meet people wherever they are. I have a little more say in what that looks like. Saying no is a lot easier now because I don't have to ask. The only person I have to ask is like my business partner, and he already knows usually if I'm going to say no to something. So I think that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we're gonna have that fight, I already know it's coming. He already knows it's coming, which is nice. Versus like I don't like the idea of having to explain something that is intuitive for me. To not necessarily superior, but explain something that's intuitive to me when I'm touching and seeing things every day versus someone who's not touching and seeing those things every day. Also, for me, it's like value.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to make sure I have my value and get my value and find that. And so that's, being at 1340 gets me a step closer to getting closer and getting more and more of my value. So I think those are the things that the biggest difference that I've had and looking at 57th Street versus here now owning 1340 and being a co-owner as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, and you had, going back a step, you had mentioned, filming and stuff like that. Could you talk a little bit about Samples and Samples, how you came up with it, any of the events that you kind of do?
Yeah, so Samples and Samples is music paired with wine. And so I tour the country. I'll pick, 6 records. Sorry, I'll pick 6 wines, 18 records, 3 records per wine. And I use kind of this like the concept of synesthesia of when I taste wine, I hear weights, I hear tone and notes, and I think of texture and weight. And so trying to take this concept of wine drinking and making it as simple for people as possible, but making it, entertaining and engaging. I think like a lot of people's introduction to wine, the wine itself, the category feels very exclusive. So if I can use a medium that is the most inclusive medium, right? Everybody sings in the shower, right? So if I can use that medium to get people to engage and to get them to think about wine and trust themselves, then I win, right? Samples and Samples is a way to. My goal for Samples is to do 2 very simple things, and I'll let you behind the curtain a little bit. Well, 3 things: make as much money as possible, yes. And the other 2 is I want to give you your curiosity back. As kids, as youth, we're all super curious, and then as we go through society and as we grow up, we live like we get that taken stripped from us in a lot of ways, right? And if I can give you your curiosity, show you things you've never seen, try things, and let that light bulb come off again or go off again, then I've given you something that you've lost. And the last thing is I want to give you, your in a lot of ways your confidence back, right? You come into this world with everything you need. And this is a personal philosophy of mine. We come into this world with all the things that we need, all the tools, right? The foundational tools. And as we grow and as we maturate, the people around us, our community helps hone those things. But our personality, who we are, we come with those things. We come perfect already. And, I think it's my job to remind you that how you come into this and for instance, through your palate is absolutely perfect, right? And my job is not to tell you what to like, what to drink. My job is to tell you how to recognize the things within yourself and then use that and be able to articulate those things. And not to say, oh, you have to drink this wine or you have to drink this region or this style is better, but saying, no, what resonates with you? You're perfect with the idea and the feelings that you have about a certain wine. And I just give you the game. I just give you the language to be able to talk about it and think about it and to be able to grow. And that is the goal of wine drinking. And that's, if you can have those two things, if I give you those two things, then screw the wine tasting, screw the music. Like, I've given you something much more valuable that you can take with you forever. So that's kind of, that is where samples and samples come from. That's why we created it. And it's an excuse for me, you know, to travel, drink, and talk shit. So
Yeah, totally. And I loved what you said about, like, you know, every person knows what they like, and you know, giving them the power to know, like, no, you like that wine, like it, you know, you don't have to listen to everyone else telling you like that you have to like this wine because this Psalm said it was cool or whatever.
yeah, it's like, no.
No. Um and then so once you came up with the idea, how did you start marketing it? How did you kind of spread the word and get booked?
Yeah, so it was word of mouth initially. We did it like in these little studios, you know, like it wasn't completely legal the way we would do it, but at first it was just for friends, and then we'd rent out like an Airbnb or like a place that had a really great vibe, and would say, hey, buy a ticket. It was just mostly friends and people like early adopters and people who like thought the concept was cool. And then like this like small, really, really small magazine called Wine Enthusiast. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
Never
No.
heard of it.
But yeah, so I mean, Wine Enthusiast heard about it. And you know, I got on the cover, and so getting booked was a lot easier then. After that, I think too, like, you know, the first booking actually was there's two people who are at fault for my first like kind of tour and booking, and that's one of those persons is here today. So Rachel and Rebecca are responsible for my first like major booking, because we did it through City Winery, because the concept worked, and you know they were crazy enough to believe in it. And so we started doing it in a couple cities across the country, and people loved it. And you know, then I wound up at the end of last year at Stanford University doing it for 200 kids. And you know, I think there's a proof of concept. And so now it's just, you know, building my mailing list, using Instagram, social media, word of mouth, and just, you know, telling the truth, you know, like, and being honest about how I feel about certain wines, certain regions. That, you know, I feel like that energy permeates further than maybe knowing what samples of samples is. I think a lot of people like radiate and connect with a lot of the concepts that I talk about, because those concepts aren't like, they're not new. They're just like true to who we are as people. And a lot of people love the concept before they even get it. So I think it's just, you know, just having dope people around and hustling harder than anyone else. So
Yeah. So how have things changed for you during COVID now that you can't really
yeah,
travel everywhere that you used to?
yeah. So there's kind of like with samples of samples. I mean, you know, the price went up for everything. That's why I always tell people, like,
Good. Yep.
you know, like video call, all this stuff, the price is going up. And I think the nice thing is people are starting to really value tastings more, right? One thing I had beef with, and you know, and was part of the problem is, you know, we do all of these free tastings, or we'll do tastings for little to no money just to sell product. But what we forget is the most valuable asset is the person, is the is the person talking about the wine. And that's the asset we undervalue the most. And so I've taken COVID as a way to say, look, I'm overcharging you guys for, you know what I mean? Like, I'm getting my value. And
Or just charging what you're worth.
like,
Yeah.
like I'm gonna set a number. And the time I realized it is I set a price, I sent the price to a person, and they said okay immediately. And I was like, wait, that was too fast. Like,
Yeah.
I thought I was charging a lot. And so that's when I realized it's like, oh, like, you know, I'd rather do less, right? I'd rather be silk than be rayon. I'd rather be like that texture that when you touch it, you feel it, you know it, versus like rayon, which looks good. And on Instagram, rayon and silk look very similar. But when you get rayon and silk, when you touch that fabric or you get that joint shipped to you, you're going to tell a difference, right? And so for me, it's always been, I raise my price, which eliminates a lot of people who are not really interested. And I've also said, look, I'm gonna donate. If I believe in the idea, believe in the cause, or if I just want to like if I just like you, or if I fuck with the idea, then I'll do it. I'll do it for I'd rather do it for free than charge you underneath my value. So it's
Hmm.
been raising my price, doing a lot of Zooms, working on our, our kind of delivery and shipping within Illinois. That's been huge for us in that sense, and thinking about that concept. It's forced me to kind of coalesce 1340 and Derrick Westbrook a little bit more. And a lot of more no's. We shorten our hours just for personal preservation. Like, I don't want to be around people. Like, I rather like stay away from. I always say, like, I love people, but I don't like you. So stay away from me. Especially right now during COVID.
You don't want their germs.
Yeah, like, so it's been a lot of trying to force people to Zoom, force people to our wine clubs, and just that's been really going inside of myself and working on creating, from a Derrick Westbrook standpoint, creating things that feel really that resonate with me, and taking more time with those things, and shooting. Like, I've been shooting a ton during COVID, and just having a team that can shoot that I feel comfortable with. And then from the wine shop perspective is, we pivoted towards, I would say probably about 30 to 40% of our shelves right now. In the last couple of months have been closeouts, so I can make a ton of money on it. And I can make my numbers work even better. And it made me better at being able to sell as a person and being able to talk about wine. So it was definitely a pivot towards, online sales, and towards closeouts. Like, just, it's a drug game, buy low, sell high. So that's what I'm doing.
And before I forget, on the note of paying people for their time, if you wouldn't mind putting your Cash App in the chat, then
Yes.
people can make sure to pay
Okay.
you for your time.
Thank you. I'll do it at the end here. Yeah,
Cool.
I'll do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, whenever you want to. I just want to make sure that if people want to send a little support your way, then they can. Because and also we just really appreciate you taking the time. And I think that, to your point, I do think that in the wine industry sometimes we're expected to know all of these things, gain all this experience, gain all this knowledge, and then give it away for free.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, and
and
I think too, it's like, I always think about, like, picking and choosing when to give it away, right? Like,
yeah.
there's, like, you know, the people I care about and the people who I think like will do something with it. The lesson I've learned, and all the great things I've gotten have been for free, and they've come from people who realize that I'm going to do something with it and like push the culture forward, whether it be wine, whether it be like thinking about samples and samples from the music standpoint versus like education policy change, like thinking about those things. All the free lessons I've gotten have been the best because you know they believed that I was going to do something with it, and I felt charged to do something because I knew how important the time was. So it picking and choosing when to do free stuff too has been an integral part about what I want to do, and kind of developing my brand, if you will. So
Yeah, definitely. Now I have just a very small topic. I'm sure you can cover it in like 30 seconds. What has your experience been like as a Black man in the wine industry?
yeah, so the interesting thing is, from what I love about being from the South is, like, you see your racism coming a lot of times, right? Like, and no offense, I like that more than like the subversive, like passive aggressive. Like, I'm not a big fan of, like, look, if you don't like me, if you hate me, cool. Like, and we could still potentially work together. But like, I don't deal with the microaggression stuff really well. And so that's been a big part of being in the wine industry for me. I do realize, like, I have a little bit more privilege as having a pretty big platform and being, I'll say it to you guys, but what my friends call me, like, fake famous, is like, you like that alone gives me a little bit more privilege to be able to like set the tone. Um, so I see that, and because of that, I think that for me, especially when it comes to like buyers and a lot of times with customers, is because I have the platform to set that tone, it's easier for me to create a safe space for myself, right? And then force everyone to like shift their universe towards me. And it's a way of me taking back power, and especially, and then thus being able to like create a safe space for other people who go unseen or unheard. Like, so that is the one thing that I do appreciate about like being a Black man in this industry and having like a infinitesimal amount of, you know, notoriety or power in that space, is I get to use it and flip it. And because, you know, I realize that like, you know, it's easier for me to do that and I rather make people uncomfortable than me be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, I've lived my life having to be the uncomfortable one. So, you know, if you don't like it, you know, go somewhere else. Like
Yeah.
I'm embracing my old man, like, you know, the old crotchety man. Like so I'm loving
Get
it.
off my wine
Like,
shop lawn.
my wine shop. If you don't like it, go.
I like that. Yeah, and I know that that's like, you know, kind of an obviously evolving topic and obviously a huge topic that we could do on its own. But, you know, I just wanted to kind of, you know, just ask you what it's been like and then also kind of what you want your impact in the wine industry to be.
Yeah, I really want. So I want to try to make this quick. So one thing about working in like education policy change, one thing about like in a nonprofit sector when you're like dealing with like these broad issues, is you're working to eliminate the necessity for your job, right? So like if I address homelessness and I do it properly, then everything goes perfectly. Like we know it's probably not, but everything goes perfectly. You ultimately are trying to make sure you have no job. You have to go do something else. And I think as sommeliers, I think like that's kind of my goal, is to eliminate the need for me, right? As the barometer for what wine drinking should be, right? Like if I can give you all the tools to where you can explore and learn and be curious on your own, then the only thing you need me is because you just want to, like I said, talk shit and drink wine. Like that's like, I want that to ultimately be the job, instead of saying, like, instead of having to, you know, teach everyone about, like, reteach people against the marketing that they've gotten, reteach people against what we've been told socially that we should and should not like, or not trusting ourselves. If I can eliminate my job in that sense, then that's the greatest impact. So, you know, it's never going to go away, but I think the impact is moving, like getting us one step closer, and, you know, creating a pipeline for, you know, other people who look like me and who think like me, because, you know, there's not I don't see enough of others in the category, and I don't mind that we're other. I can use it because I'm Black. So I don't mind it. But so I think, like, you know, embracing the otherness and making sure otherness becomes more mainstream is important for me, and whatever that looks like. But definitely creating a pipeline for other creatives, um, and people who have the same mentality, right? Like it's not about color, it's about ideology. So.
Yeah, well, and along those lines, I got a question in the chat about mentorship and, you know, what has worked for you in terms of having mentors, and how do you kind of want to mentor the next generation?
So having mentors, for me, I've been really fortunate that I've been in really great places, and I've shown interest and curiosity. I think to in order to be a mentor, you have to, like, there's an initiative you have to take, um, and finding the interest of what your mentor is interested in has always been important. It's like, who are the people doing the thing I want to do, and flatter them and ask them, how'd you do it, right? But then come with questions and come with actions of what you're already doing. It's always been successful for me, right? It's just the awkward question or the one thing that you're nervous about, like, ask that question. Ask the, you know, not the generic one. It's like, well, how'd you get started? But asking the question about what is it? What is the thing? What was the hardest thing for you to overcome, right? Or what is your pain point? Like me, I think the thing that's gotten me the most distance is asking my mentor, what's the hardest thing? What's the thing that you're working on that's giving you the most difficulty right now? And granted, 98% of the time I can't answer it, but at least it shows that like I'm curious and thinking about, this thing in a broader way. So that's kind of, finding the person that's doing what you want to do, right? Copy it and then ask them what their pain points are. And then for me, kind of how I approach mentorship is um it's really kind of like get in and do it, Socratic method, kind of like, hey, oh, you want to learn something? Well, I'm gonna show you a couple times, but then you go do it. Like do the work. I'll walk you through the work. I'll tell you about my pitfalls. I'll tell you why I do things and why this is not working. Like I'm a big fan of telling you how I failed and what I suck at, and telling you, hey, this is what I suck at. This is what you should probably get better at because I'm working on this. And then telling them to find out the things that they're really great at and focus on those things, and build a team around them who can help them with the things that they're weak at. So it's really just, if you're willing to show up at the shop and ask questions, and the time where it's not, not on a Friday or Saturday night because you just want to hang out. But like if you're there on Tuesday, Wednesday in the middle of the day, like, one of my, I'm going to give him a shout out, even though he's not here, is, one of the guys who I can't wait to see what he does is Vernon Jackson. Like he's in this industry, in this game, and he's curious, annoyingly curious sometimes, which is absolutely perfect because you have to be that in order to get there. And he's teaching me to think about things that I haven't, that I need to do that I suck at, or that, opportunities. And he's keeping me youthful and fresh in my mindset. So I think it's all of those things are important, finding someone who's, younger, who sees things in a different way, and then, learning from someone who's older, who's been there and done that.
Yeah, totally. So then what changes do you want to see from the wine industry in the future?
Yeah. There's a couple things. I'll get on my soapbox. One thing I want to see is I want to see the wine industry lift experts. I think the idea, and I'm thinking from an influencer perspective, like what frustrates me is we are scared to call out these big brands. Like I am not I will in a minute question or talk about what I don't like about what Wine Enthusiast does, and this in the same breath say I appreciate the platform. And I think I wish that we felt more comfortable about speaking truth to power and telling that power like, hey, I'm doing it in a way that says this is in your benefit as well, right? And I think it's tough, I will admit, but I love I've worked with Gallo before, and I'll tell them about themselves at the same time, but realizing the benefit of what they do, right? I think speaking truth to power, and if more times and more people spoke truth to power, and if we focused on shutting out ignorance, or not necessarily shutting out ignorance, but addressing ignorance within the industry, whether it becomes from a social perspective or just from a wine education perspective, and saying and this is a societal issue, right? We are afraid of intellect and intelligence and truth as a society, right? Like we want snippets, we want quick bites, but we don't want to know, we don't think about, the intellectuals. And I think that if we start to revel in that and knowledge in that sense, then we can help the populace, right? And you can revel in knowledge, you can love knowledge, and then you can still talk to people at their level without shaming them. And I think that's what I would love to see, is if we could make wine inclusive without dumbing it down. And I don't think you have to do that. And so that's my biggest frustration with the industry right now, is we think to make it inclusive you have to dumb it down, or and I don't think that's the case. I think people, if you give them an opportunity, they'll surprise you.
Yeah, totally. And then one last question before we can kind of open it up to questions from everyone else. What do you wish you could tell the Derrick who is just starting out in the wine industry?
Don't
Real
do
Derrick.
it.
Don't do it. Go into finance.
Yeah, right. Like, you know how much more money you can make there. I would say don't do it, and make sure you really want to do it. And knowing me, I'd still probably do it, so it's perfect. I also would say like take those chances. Like there's one or two opportunities that I didn't take because I was afraid of what failure will look like or rejection. And what I realize now is like, you know, was it Jim Carrey said something about like he talked about his father was a comedian and his father got fired from the job, and he was like, you could fail at being mediocre, so why not try to go be great? And I'm paraphrasing, greatly paraphrasing, but it's like, oh, like, take the chance, and if you fail, then okay, start over. Like it's, you know, I every like once a month or every 3 months, I sit down and I think, okay, what if this thing I'm trying to do fails? What happens? You know what I realized? I go back to Nashville and I go live with my mom or my dad for 3 to 6 months and start over. And if that's the worst that can happen, you know, and a lot of us may have like more to lose, and I'm in a position where I don't have as much to lose, but if you think about what's the worst going to happen and you're like, okay, that's the worst, we got it out of my system, let's go. I think I tell myself that, if that's failure, then cool. Is it worth, is it worth being as great as you can be? So I say take the chance, and what would be the other thing? Listen more, save your money more. You know what I mean? Like, I'm cheap, but be cheaper, I guess. So I don't know. I blame that on my father though. He's notoriously cheap, so I love it. So yeah, I say I have him in my ear a little bit more. So yeah.
Nice, cool. Well, thank you so much so far, and I'll just open it up to everyone else. If anyone else has any questions for Derrick.
Hey, Derrick, thanks for talking today. Just one thing I was curious about. So working at Next and Elizabeth, do you have a lot of clientele that you fostered over there that followed you to 1340 into the store? Do you have like cultivated that, or do you find it pretty starting over?
That was definitely starting over. Sorry, I'm looking at my Cash App while we're talking because I don't know, but I don't want to give you the wrong one. And you guys.
I was also just about to pull it up, so I could send it if you want to answer that. Yeah.
I would say not so much. I think. Oh, and this is a great kind of lead-in. Is the frustrating thing about what we do is people know the brand, but they don't know who you are, right? So in those environments, I can have a great pairing, and when you leave, all you know is, oh man, that pairing was great at that place, right? But I never get the credit for the work that I put in, and the paycheck's cool. But what we realize is that your capital comes in more ways than just that, right? Than just the money you make, and so yeah, not many people follow me from those places to where I am now. And I wish like, there's so many times I wish I could have given out a business card while on the floor at Next or Elizabeth. And I know that like you can't, but yeah. And that's me thinking that my voice is big enough and important enough that like I have enough value that it's worth you following me. It's worth you hearing about me. So, but no one's following me that I know of off the top of my head. I mean, distributors, like they know who I am.
Yep.
but as far as like the public or civilians, if you will, no, not so much. Also, I'm sorry if I'm long-winded here. I feel like I am.
No, it's great. Yeah, I think you've had some great like insights about, I think just moving from restaurants to retail and doing events and kind of like, I mean, it's cliche at this point, but pivoting, I think is especially relevant during COVID and everything else. So
I think too, like here's some insight. The one thing I've been really focusing on from a personal perspective is like what further education looks like, and balancing that with like the work is really, really, I think in the retail setting is easier in some ways, but super tough. And finding like those downtimes. I think like that's always been the key is like, how do I find the downtimes to further education while in the midst of trying to build this behemoth and like reevaluating what the value of that education is. Because I don't like it's important for us, and consumers don't care as much, right? They only care like if you get to a certain level. But like that's been a frustrating thing for me is thinking about return on investment in that space. So that's one thing. Like, if anybody has any information about that, I would love for you to tell me your thoughts and feelings on that. But yeah, further education is important. Trying to balance it out and thinking about the value of it outside of just studying on my own. So.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that you and I have talked about a lot, like just personally, where, it's like, do we go down the court path? Do we go down WSET? And like, what's the value of each? Does it really have any effect on your everyday life? And if it does, like, how do you kind of leverage it and market yourself and all of that?
Yeah, I have not figured that one out.
No.
I have a management team who keeps pressing me on this issue, and I'm like, look, I don't know.
I think and it's obviously it's an ongoing question for all of us too, with all of the court things right now. But yeah.
Yeah, we got questions to answer, and I think like, I'm interested in seeing and hearing, not even just from the court, but just like trying to figure out what the next steps are for what ongoing education looks like and the return on investment. Like I want to, and for me, right, being a public figure, like, which is always annoying to say, but like being a public figure, like how do we leverage that, and how do we get the populace to understand what a sommelier is? I think there's a lot of confusion about what it means to be a sommelier. And I think it becomes more valuable the more the public has a better understanding of the concept. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone else?
I got a question. I'm just curious, are there any wines that either varietal or region wise that you didn't think were going to sell in retail and are some of the best sellers, and vice versa? Is there anything that you thought would sell like great and it's not, or just any kind of transitional, varietals or regions that sell or don't sell in retail?
Yeah, so I'll give you a really quick perspective of our wine shop. So we're in the West Loop, and my focus is Central Eastern Europe, Spain, Portugal, Canary Islands. And I've been really getting heavy into Loire recently, just as a matter of like just enjoying it. So kind of the areas that sell really well. I'm gonna bag into your answer. So Cali sells exceptionally well. Natural wines are huge right now. Orange wines are huge right now. Pet knots are big for people. So with that concept, also when you talk about the West Loop, there's a real conversation we have to have. The thing about West Loopers are disposable income, wine level knowledge does not match their disposable income at all, right? And I say this in comparison to like being in Hyde Park, where disposable income and West Loop disposable income are actually very, very, very close together, but they're more of interest. And I think it's because you're in a space where you're near university, like level of diversity. Like there's not so much of an echo chamber in Hyde Park as there is in the West Loop, as far as like being super brand specific, which we're not brand specific at all. So with that knowledge, the places where I've seen a lot of growth and interest have actually been in Central Eastern Europe. Like that region, because what I can do is once I show somebody something new in a style that they like already, like they become hooked. And so it's that level of being able to like, oh, I have something cool. Like it's like the underground music group, right? You love them before everybody knows about them. So I've seen that those things have resonated a lot with people. So I think, Central Eastern European red wine has been great. I think Pinot Noir from Austria has been really strong. I think it's the perfect situation where you take a varietal people really know, right? And you take a region that's lesser known for the public. Like, like when you're talking about like Crimstyle, Comtal, like when you think about like those regions, like no one knows, that where those regions are, but they know Pinot Noir. And so when you talk about Pinot Noir, that sells huge because of where it sells huge because of the varietal, and people get hooked on it because it's from a different place. I think like selling like international varietals and non-international or non-recognizable regions have been a biggie for me, and that becomes a gateway drug into being able to explore the entirety of it. So I'll say that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then I think Allie had one question, and then maybe we'll call it a day.
Don't worry, it's not an in-depth question, but this has been awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Derrick, Miranda. Derrick, I have a project coming up this Friday, and I was going to come in on Wednesday. Are you around on Wednesday then? Am I going to be?
Yeah. I'm there all day Wednesday, so I got nothing to do. This is all I'm going to be doing on Wednesday is paperwork and justifying with Cody why the budget is going to be blown again. So
Sweet, I'll come in and interrupt that.
Thank you, man. Yeah, that'll be helpful.
Bring wine. Help him out.
Right. So Cody, I mean, we're planning for the future. We got it. We'll see how that goes.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Derrick, for coming by, talking to us, sharing your experiences. I hope that this was useful or just interesting, at least to everyone, as we're, in sort of a second shutdown here in Chicago, and I think beyond too. Yeah, thanks again to Derrick.
Yeah. Also, thank you all. I know all of you, so it's great to see familiar faces from a safe distance. And y'all look great. I mean, the COVID is doing you well. None of you look like it's hurt you too much, you know what I mean? So looks like you're doing your self-care. I appreciate that. Look great.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you, Derrick. Thank you, everyone, for showing up.
Cheers, guys.